Okay, thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, also my fiance Sharon is here. She hails from Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area. I happened to grow up, we didn't meet till about, gosh, I have to do the math now, a little over 8 years ago. And I happened to grow up in the Northeast. I grew up in upstate New York, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, always in the Northeast. My family would vacation here. It started with my grandmother on my father's side owned Casa Marina in Sconset. So if you go to Sconset and you take the road and you just keep going straight past the circle and keep going straight, you'll run into it. And then they sold that later, and then my parents started coming here when they were in college. They would work here in the summers, like many people do now. And they've loved the island ever since. They eventually built a small place called Miamoor, M-I-A-M-O-O-R, kind of a play on words for Spanish, mi amor, my love, and then more, spelled a little bit differently. And so we still come almost every year. Didn't make it last year. Last time I was here was 2 years ago. So as far as the astronaut thing, I remember being in 1969, I was in a summer camp. We didn't have, when we first landed on the moon, we didn't have TV then. It was a tough summer camp. We had radio though. We listened to it on the radio, and I remember when we first landed on the moon, and I was I was almost 13 at the time, and just 5 days before my 13th birthday, I believe. And ever since then, I thought about maybe becoming an astronaut, but never really thought seriously about it until after I'd finished, ended up going to college at the Naval Academy, graduated in '79, and then I was a navigator in the Navy. You don't have to be a pilot, you don't have to be in the military to become an astronaut. I was a navigator. I went to Navy test pilot school as a navigator, so they need to change the name at some point, but again, it's test pilots, they kind of name it what they want. But so it's not only test pilots that go through test pilot school, but also flight test engineers and flight test officers, basically, is what I was. Started applying in 1984 and was accepted in 1990. So it took me 4 tries, and 6 years to finally get accepted. I usually tell people that I applied so many times that they got tired and they said, well, if we accept him, he won't apply anymore and we don't have to deal with him. So, but that's just, as many of you all know, it's just persistence. Keep trying, because usually the first answer will be no in any time you ask. I know parents don't like me to remind kids about that they'll just keep asking, but just set your sights and keep moving. So I was in the class in 1990, ended up flying 4 times. The pictures I'll show you here today are from my last mission, my 4th mission. So I flew the space shuttle missions. Almost all my missions were on Endeavour except for my first one, which is on the Discovery. If anybody gets a chance to see one of the space shuttles, you may have already seen it. In DC area, Discovery is there. The space shuttle Atlantis is in Florida. And then the Endeavour is in California, at the California Science Center, right near USC in LA. So I'll be talking about this, and as far as the basket background, give you a little bit of idea. So it was like I believe it was in the mid-90s. So my mom never bought a lightship basket here because, as some people had called them, she always, as my grandmother called them, she called them Nantucket minks. She thought they were too expensive. My mom, always being very practical, never got one. So I decided, well, I think I'm going to make her a basket. So my siblings always give me a hard time. Yeah, kissing up to mom again, whatever. So I made her one in the mid-90s, and then once I started training for space station in like 97 or so, we started traveling a lot to Russia. The way it works is that, so International Space Station, I'll talk a little bit more now, is an international program. I'm a big believer in international programs because there's a lot of benefits you get from international programs. Our major partner right now in International Space Station is Russia. Many of you know that our relationship with Russia is probably at an all-time low right now, but people forget we're still flying in space together. We're still relying on the Russians to get to space. Hopefully, in the near future, that dependency will end, because we'll either SpaceX or a NASA with Orion, or a Boeing with their CST-100 capsule will be launching again, once again, from U.S. soil. But what happens is that in these international partnerships is that people forget about the politics, and you just focus on the mission, and you want to do the mission safely. And so you're able to work together when you find a common goal, and that right now that's flying in space. So before I went, they said on space, a space shuttle mission is like a sprint. A space station mission is like a marathon. So where my mission was about 6.5 months in space. There were astronauts that just returned recently. One of the three is female, and she spent 204 days. I only spent 196 days up there. But so that length of time, to put it in perspective, if you could imagine going on a family trip in a Winnebago and never getting out for 6.5 months, that's what it's like. And so you can imagine, we never fought up there. We got along all the time, never had any arguments. I'm just joking, really, but seriously, I mean, that gives you an idea of living in a confined space, of the challenges of that. So knowing that, they gave us the option of, this is the indicator that I'm talking too long. Knowing that is that you have to find time to relax. So a space shuttle mission, if it's 7 to 10 days long, it's kind of like finals week. You can gut it out. You can go through with maybe only 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night, and you can gut it out for that length of time. But for a space station mission, it's more like a marathon, and you have to have ways to relax and have your own free time to do things. So once I started training in Russia, the deal is that if it's Russian hardware, the Russians have to certify you and train you in that. So I spent through about 4 years, I spent about half that time in Russia. Training outside of Moscow in a town called Star City. In Russian, it's Zvyozny Gorodok. Ya говорю по-русски. I had to learn Russian, even though the official language on the International Space Station is English. We had a Russian commander. Our Russian commander was, what happened here? Sorry. Okay, so our Russian commander was Yuri Onufrienko. His name is spelled in Cyrillic letters up there. Karl Waltz on the left, yours truly on the right. MKC really isn't MKC, it's MKS in Russians. Guess what? The Russians have their own acronyms, and it stands for Международная космическая станция. So everybody that knows another language probably knows this. If you're going to learn another language, learn it when you're younger, because when I was learning it when I was 40-something, it was a bit challenging there. So ISS for International Space Station. This is kind of what the space station looked like when we left it. This was our crew, an all-male crew. The last class that was selected a couple years ago, there were 12 astronauts selected. I think they had something like 30,000 applicants or something like that. They selected 12. Half of those were female, so NASA's starting to get it right as far as the numbers. Although if you look at the percentages of females in the astronaut office, we're still, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but I know it's still better than Congress and many other areas in our country like that. Why we were an all-male crew for this, so we were Expedition 4 to the International Space Station. Now I think they're up to Expedition 59 or 60, so that dates me a little bit. So we were early on in the building of Space Station, and that happened to be the crew. Yuri is actually from the Ukraine, and he would remind us of that he wasn't Russian, he was Ukrainian. But I mean, he was still part of the Russian Air Force. He was an Air Force pilot. Karl Waltz was an Air Force flight test engineer from the US, and I was a naval flight officer or test flight officer. But it just happened to be that's how the crews came out. Now, we had a crew of 3. Up there now they have a crew of 6, but they kind of stagger the launches. I think right at this moment there's a crew of 3, but because a crew of 3 just landed a few days ago, but they're going to launch a crew of 3 here shortly. If at any time, if anybody has a question they want to ask it, please go ahead and ask it, because if you're like me, you'll probably forget. So launching in the space shuttle is kind of like, I say it's like launching off an aircraft carrier. So my background was a naval flight officer, a navigator, and an A6 intruder, where I sat on the right side. They don't fly those airplanes anymore. Everything I've ever flown is in a museum now, except Space Station. I don't think Space Station will ever end up in a museum. It's just too big. It may end up in a flying museum, maybe higher. But so launching off an aircraft carrier, we go from 0 to 150 miles an hour in about 2.5 seconds. In the space shuttle, we go from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. And the acceleration you get at first feels like a catapult launch off the aircraft carrier when you have a lot of wind over the deck if the ship's going very fast and you're not very heavily loaded. Now I have to, and Sharon or other people usually say, yeah, Dan, most people know what that feels like, launching off an aircraft carrier. But the Navy does have programs to, I don't know if anybody's ever done it, but if you know anybody in the Navy or contact somebody like big Navy towns like San Diego or Norfolk, stuff like that, they do have programs where they will fly people out to their aircraft carrier, and you can spend a day or night there, and then they'll fly back. And part of that is getting a catapult launch, usually off of the aircraft carrier. So if you ever get a chance, do it, because the aircraft carrier is amazing. It's I mean, just like the shuttle, it's a feat of engineering that it's amazing that they even do it. It's they have 5,500. It's a floating city, basically, when you're on that. So I'm going to pause here and show a quick movie. So this doesn't happen to be one of my launches. This is HD video. They did not have HD video when I flew, so just for the quality. So this happens to be Atlantis. I wasn't on Atlantis, but this launch is very similar to ones that I had.
T-minus 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
So on a couple of my missions, it stopped here. You might be able to see the tail swing, but because the shuttle main engines, they're being fueled by, I'll show you later in a picture, but they're being, the fuel and oxidizer is liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen that's in that big brown tank. And then they feed, there's pipes basically that go into the shuttle and feed these main engines. And because these engines are off axis, because the all of this, the 4.5 million pounds, is held to the launch pad with 8 bolts. Each bolt is about this big around, and there's 4 on each solid rocket booster. So when you have this off-axis thrust, the shuttle actually bends about a foot at the tip. And so we call it the twang, but it actually bends a little bit. But if your engine's shut down at this point, then the shuttle just continues to rock a little bit there on the launch pad. Everybody's sitting inside, and we have a lot of bells and whistles, and the ground's talking to us, and we know that something went wrong. And if we need to get out of the shuttle in a hurry, we can do that. But it's not a good day if the engine shut down. So there's a camera on the outside, and as you look at the video, look at how much vibration there is. All this vibration we feel inside too, so there's a lot of vibration inside the shuttle. We depend on mission control, even though we see all of our instruments. Mission control gets telemetry, and they can alert us to any problems that they see or anything like that. So it's, even though there's only 5 to 7 of us in the space shuttle at the time, and we do work as a crew on the flight deck. There's mainly 4 people there that are working together, but we rely a lot upon the ground to give us information as we go up. And so there's the shuttle main engines, again being fueled by the big orange tank that you can see there, solid rocket boosters. Let's see, the trajectory, when we go up, it looks like we're almost going vertical at first, and then we have to kind of head towards the horizon, because when we're in orbit, we need the speed going this way, and we need that 17,000 miles an hour parallel to the surface of the Earth. We don't want to go just straight up, so the trajectory is to get you out of the thickest part of the atmosphere as soon as possible, but at the same time we're kind of arcing towards the horizon, because eventually that's where we want the velocity. And a lot of times when we're in orbit, people say, oh, it's zero gravity, or they'll say microgravity, but really we're falling to the Earth. Once we get that speed, we're falling to the Earth every second, but we're going so quickly this way, so fast this way, we never get any closer. See some of the vibration right there.
On Atlantis have now been throttled down to 72% of rated thrust as the orbiter prepares to pass through the area of maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle in the lower atmosphere. The engine's now beginning to throttle back up. Atlantis, you are go and throttle up.
You see, again, we're kind of arcing. We need that speed in the right direction.
Is it hot in there?
No, it's not. It's not hot at all. We do have our spacesuits on. They're kind of the orange suits, and before Challenger accident, we basically just wore flight suits. We didn't have any actual partial pressure suits. After Challenger, because the Challenger ended up losing pressurization as they were going up, they did 2 things. They gave us a partial pressure suit, so if we lose pressure inside the spacecraft, we have these suits that will keep the pressure around our bodies and oxygen, and they added parachutes as well. So there is a possibility if we were to we basically can't see here, but the hatch on the other side, if we had a problem and or a vehicle breakup, there would be a possibility to get out of the vehicle then. But inside, it's very comfortable. The hardest part about launch is that you get in the spaceship normally about 4 hours before launch, and you wait. You know, it's a government, hurry up and wait, or like most dads, I guess, or moms or dads. Yeah, one of the main reasons is part of it is air loads on the shuttle itself. So for the first 90 seconds, the pilots couldn't fly it manually if they wanted to, because the space shuttle, when it flew, was kind of like a butterfly on the side of a rocket. So all these surfaces are moving to reduce the loads as you're going, reducing the loads on the wings and other things that the computer does, and no pilot could to do that. So for the first 90 seconds, the computer's doing everything. After that point, the pilots could fly manually if they wanted to control it. The other reason is the communication antennas are on the top of the shuttle. So they can communicate with the ground, they have to have them that way. There really aren't any other. Now later on during this trajectory, you don't see it here, but with about 2 minutes before engine cutoff, they actually do roll 180 degrees. So then the antennas can then communicate to geostationary satellites much higher that way. Oh. At 2 minutes.
Full throttle now at liftoff. The fully fueled shuttle, boosters, and external tank weigh of that liftoff weight in propellant. 1 minute, 30 seconds into the flight, all three auxiliary power units that provide hydraulic power to the orbiter's systems in good shape, as are the fuel cells providing electricity to all of the systems on board. Atlantis is already 19 miles in altitude, downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, 20 miles, traveling 2,500 miles per hour.
At 2 minutes, the solid rocket boosters run out of fuel.
The point at which the twin solid rocket boosters burn out and separate from
You'll see them separate here on that side. And similar to SpaceX,
Separation confirmed.
those boosters were reused. They have a parachute that comes out, they float down, they land in the water. Certainly not as classy as what SpaceX is doing now of landing their boosters on Earth. But you know, the things that Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX and some of his vision is just an example, I think, of, because many people thought there's no way you can ever reuse a booster. It's just not economically feasible, et cetera, and he's proven them all wrong, because he is able to, right now, the SpaceX Falcon 9 and Falcon 9 Heavy are the least, I say, most economical way to get to orbit in the space right now. Okay, so that's just the first 2 minutes. We continue on for another six and a half minutes, and then when the engines cut off, it's kind of like somebody just flew a switch. The last minute of flight, we're actually, we feel about 2.5 Gs of acceleration, 2.5 to 3 Gs. The engines actually start to throttle back, because if you remember your physics, F equals ma, if the force is the same, your mass is decreasing because you're burning fuel, your acceleration goes up. And they actually start throttling back the engines, and then main engine cutoff, boom, everything starts floating. Instantly, you're now floating or in free fall around the planet. Okay. Okay, so that was just probably, I don't know, maybe 15 seconds after launch. Again, a lot of vibration inside, and that's why we do depend upon the ground to communicate, tell us if anything is going wrong. This was our family photo in space. The Advent calendar, a lot of times people look at the Advent calendar and say, hey, you're not really in space, because how come that's hanging down? Well, we use a lot of duct tape up there. If you want to keep something in place, we use duct tape, we use Velcro. The Russians have little clips that they use, and this happened to be, since Yuri was the commander, you know, he's the parent, he decided what we would wear for our family photo. We launched in December of 2001, and so these happened to be our Russian flight suits we're wearing there. Shortly after launch, we could look, now this is zoomed in, where we orbit is 200 miles above the Earth, which to put it to scale, if you have a drinking glass, the inside of the rim would be where the Earth is, and the outside of the rim would be where we orbit. So if the Earth's diameter is about 7,000 miles, we only orbit about 200 miles above the Earth. So you don't have to get very far above the Earth to get out of the atmosphere, and we have to get out of 99.99% of the atmosphere in order to keep that, maintain that velocity. So there's where our flight started here at pad 39B here, and this was at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Anybody see a launch at Kennedy Space Center ever? Okay, great. So that's where the shuttle is built up, and the vehicle assembly building takes a 6-hour ride to one of the launch pads, and then we launched out of there. Any of the launch sites that you'll see, one thing I want to mention about kind of rocket 101 is that when you look at any rocket ship, only about 5 to 10% of that rocket is going to make it to orbit. The rest is the fuel and the structure to hold, mainly to hold the fuel and everything together. So it takes a lot of energy to put something into orbit. We orbit around the Earth once every 90 minutes. We're in orbit. Essentially, our orbit does precess a little bit, but essentially, if you think of that, we're in a steady orbit and the Earth is rotating underneath us, so our view constantly changes. We have about 45 minutes in daylight, 45 minutes in darkness, and then the views are just, that's like the most favorite thing to do when we're up there is to look out the window, because the view just keeps changing when you're up there. And this happens to be, I don't even know if this is a sunrise or a sunset, I just forget, but every 45 minutes you see something like this. This is a picture I need to take out of this presentation, but this is what guys do, you know, especially fishermen on Nantucket when they caught that big fish, right? You know, we just did something cool. So this was after my first spacewalk, happened to be in a Russian spacesuit, and similar to the U.S. spacesuit, you can't see it, but this blue long underwear we're wearing actually has hundreds of feet of small 1/8-inch tubing to cool our bodies, because you don't have any free convection in space. Hot air doesn't, when you're in free fall, hot air doesn't rise, so you have to cool your body with conduction. And so that's what's going on here. Now you do have forced air, you have forced convection where you can force air around, you can blow air around and stuff like that. I mean, we need to do that inside the spaceship because, you know, we breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide, and so we have to get rid of that somehow. But this is mainly to cool our bodies, because if we didn't, we would get too hot in the spacesuit, and then this happens to be a Russian spacesuit, but if you got too hot in the spacesuit, and the suit couldn't take away all the humidity inside the suit, the inside of your visor would fog up, and that's an emergency. You have to get back to the hatch. The Russian spacesuit is kind of a one-size-fits-all suit. I don't do real well in a one-size-fits-all anything. However, I was able to work in this suit, and everything, all the equipment we used, it was a little bit different because on the U.S. systems, we didn't really have tests or exams, but in the Russian systems we did, and it was kind of different for us. But I learned very quickly that if you were having a Russian exam and you attempted to answer in Russian, they were much kinder to you than if you didn't. I mean, it's similar to any place you're around the world. If you attempt to speak another country's language, they tend to be a little bit more friendly to you, which makes sense. This is inside the Soyuz capsule. So the space shuttle took us up to space station, dropped us off, picked up the previous crew, took them home. And while we were up there, we needed a way to come down. So this is how astronauts have been getting up and down to space station since 2011, since the last flight of the space shuttle. Now this is the analog version, this is the old version, and how many people saw the movie Gravity? So Sandra Bullock had the upgraded Soyuz that she was in, but same amount of space in there, it's just the instruments have changed a little bit. So not a whole lot of room inside there. While we were up there, we had to change a docking port. We had to undock and change where the Soyuz was docked to. So we got a short ride when we were up there in the Soyuz spacecraft. But think of it, this was our lifeboat while we were up there. Anybody recognize this area here? North is to the right. It's on the west coast.
San Francisco?
There you go, San Francisco. Sorry, I don't have any prizes today, but so north is to the right. Some things you can see, San Andreas Fault is right there. I usually say don't buy real estate there. And I'll have a close-up here in a second, but just the pictures, and this is zoomed in again. I'll show you a picture of what it looks like if you look out with the naked eye, but this is definitely zoomed in a lot. And this was taken at the same time. We're just getting, it's actually a color photo. It looks black and white because we call it glint, but just a reflection of the light off of the water. Any of those, many of you have probably been over the Bay Bridge, which is right there. The Golden Gate Bridge is there. Alcatraz is there. This bridge is called Richmond Bridge. But if you see, you see the pattern of the water, so you can tell that tide was probably going out at that time when we took that photo. In downtown San Francisco here, well, actually all of San Francisco here. All right. This is a little bit farther south. Where we live now is in Pacific Grove, so Monterey area. This is a Monterey Bay. Santa Cruz is up here. Salinas Valley is that way. Pebble Beach, Pacific Grove, Monterey is in that area. Where I work right now is at what they call the Naval Postgraduate School. So it's a military graduate school, and yeah, pretty area, almost as pretty as Nantucket. This is, yes, go ahead.
You had mentioned, sorry, I'm going back to
Yeah.
a couple slides ago. You mentioned about the dock, that you guys docked. What was that procedure like as you're flying the shuttle and you're trying to hit the space station and
Yeah.
everything's kind of moving?
Yeah, I'll have another picture later to describe it, but essentially, even though you're both moving at over 17,000 miles an hour, you're flying in formation, so your relative motion, you basically match the orbit of what you're docking with. And that usually, even though we usually don't dock until the third day, and so you take some time getting into basically you have to get in the same racetrack as whatever you're docking with. And so that just takes a long time. And then the final approach, I'm trying to think of what, I think we approach at something like 1 to 2 feet per second. So it's not real significant, but it's, I'm trying to think of what that, I'll have to look up what in miles per hour, what that is equivalent to. Maybe somebody with a smartphone can figure that out. 2 feet per second, what that ends up being in miles per hour. But anyways, it's and they have different cues. The pilots have different things they're looking at. They have like a target, and the target is such that they can tell if they're off angle. Not only the distance, we have a little range.
It's 1.36 miles an hour.
Okay, all right. So a little over 1 mile an hour, not much, and if you had a 5 mile per hour bumper, you'd be okay. And so they want to make it firm enough that and usually what happens is they have latches that will connect, and then you aren't firmly connected. It's kind of like they call it like a soft dock, where you're docked enough to where you're not going to separate, and then they have motors that will bring the whole, everything together. But you can feel it. When you're on board and you feel it, it's like, boom, boom. I mean, you can tell it's something just hit you. So this is on the East Coast. Again, north is to the right. It looks like Manhattan, but this is a little bit farther south. This is the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. Has anybody been over the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel before? That's here, a series of bridges and tunnels. That's the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. You can see a ship's wake there. There's a Delmarva Peninsula. Virginia Beach is here. Norfolk is in that area. Again, this is zoomed in a little bit. Storage on Space Station is kind of stored like storage on Nantucket, not a whole lot of it. So when you're not using something, this is an airlock that we would use for a spacewalk. When you're not using it for a spacewalk, it becomes a closet to store other stuff. But then before you go on the spacewalk, you have to clear everything out. This is the actual hatch that you would go out, so that opens to vacuum. And so we have an airlock so that you put on your spacesuits, you go in this small room, and then you close this inner hatch because we're going to get rid of all the other air inside that area. So here's myself, and if you look closely, you can see Carl. There's actually 2 people in there. This is a U.S. spacesuit. U.S. spacesuit works at a lower pressure, so it's easier to work in. You're not fighting the suit as much. It does have some advantages. A disadvantage is that we're at a higher risk of decompression sickness. Any divers, scuba divers in the audience? So because we go from the pressure inside space station is sea level, the same pressure we have here, about the same mixture of nitrogen and oxygen. And then when we go on a spacewalk, we're going to a suit that has 100% oxygen, but it only runs at about 3.5 psi. So when you go from a high to low pressure, that's when you're in danger of getting decompression sickness or the bends. So that's the lower pressure is an advantage, that you're not working against the suit as much. But the Russian suit works at a higher pressure. The advantage of that is that you can get out the hatch quicker because you're not going to as low of a pressure. It runs at about 5 pounds per square inch. Disadvantage is it's harder to work in the suit. Bottom line is that this suit is good for repairing things like Hubble Space Telescope. In the Russian suit, you're not going to repair Hubble using that suit. But again, working in an international partnership, when we had the Columbia accident and all of a sudden we couldn't get these suits back and forth to refurbish them, we could always use the Russian suits. So international program gives you built-in redundancy because you can use other people's equipment and you can suffer a failure. It's kind of like software. If you have different, run Windows or run Apple operating system, if one has a generic problem, hopefully the other one can still operate. Inside space station, a fair amount of room. I would say it's probably about from here, maybe to the ceiling. Here is about the amount of room that we have inside. If you look it's very nautical, a lot of nautical, I would say, heritage in the US space program. The majority of astronauts have had a naval background. The Air Force and Army and Coast Guard folks don't like to hear that, and now, of course, naval, we include the Marine Corps, so Naval Service includes the Marine Corps, so we are putting up our numbers a little bit, but however, so if you look deck and overhead, the wording that we use inside space station is similar. If you look closely, there's a little inflatable alien right there that comes out. Just we play tricks with the ground. I mean, like in anything, when you're in, you need to make time to have fun, and to relax up there. This is a spare part to a treadmill that we have. Normally on Earth weighs about 250 pounds. It's in free fall up there, but it still has mass. So if it got going and hit you in the head, it would still hurt if it hit you, but we can just hold it in place, and it's not really being held up there, it's just being held from being knocked out just with bungee cords there. So while I'm on the subject, so they allowed us, before we flew, they said, okay, for a hobby, before you go up there, you can bring a package about this big of whatever hobby that you want. And so once when I was traveling, I don't think I finished my story, but as part of my training, I was traveling to Russia a lot, and I decided on my free time just to start making miniature baskets. And Nat Plank helped me here, and other people helped me here, and it's kind of like how to make miniatures and things like that. So what I flew up is I flew up the little discs with basically the bases with the staves sticking out of them. They look like spiders that I brought up there. And this is what I ended up weaving, was a nest of baskets like this, little oval baskets. And so this was, that was my hobby when I was up there. And it was very helpful because it was sometime, you could just relax. You felt that you were being productive and making something. And here's a photo of kind of difficult to see, but so that's me on space station, and somebody took a photo of just some of the baskets I had finished up there. Now, I couldn't put the lacquer up there. NASA, said, no, you're not going to bring, that up there to finish them. But mostly they were done up there. Yuri had a little, in Russian they call it shtamp. They had a stamp, and the Russians, it's kind of different, the different cultures. So the Russian cosmonauts, it's like a business for them to fly things in space and then they sell them later. Whereas in the US, we're not allowed to do that. And so we're prevented from doing that. But Yuri still had this stamp, and it basically says MKS MKS 4 or 4 on there, and it was an official stamp that said this flew in space. And then before we left, he destroyed the stamp. So it was all about official stamps. So what he did is on each one of these, he put a little stamp on the bottom, and that said that yes, this had flown in space. Anyway, so just different cultures, what they do and believe in there. So, but the basket weaving was really, again, very psychologically very helpful to have a hobby, to relax and just not think about. You'd think, well, why would you not think about where you are every second of the day? But I don't know, it's just important when you're in that type of environment, especially an enclosed environment. Think about not seeing anybody else, only 2 other people for 6.5 months. So it does have an isolation kind of aspect to it, and the basket weaving was very helpful for me. Okay. robotic arm. We have a robot arm on the space station, like we have a robot arm in the space shuttle. The robot arm in the space shuttle and space station both were made by Canada. They produced made the robot arm. You fly the robot. I say you fly the robot arm. If it's operating normally, you fly it like an airplane. We have controls to either go forward, backwards, up, down, left, right, or we can pitch up, pitch down, yaw left, yaw right, or roll. So you kind of fly it like an airplane. Some of the sites we see, this is an abandoned copper mine in Ajo, Arizona. Just the sun shadow that you see here. Those are settling ponds, I think, what the left over once they get the ore out. Anybody recognize this place? Southern California? Testing your navigation. San Diego. So yeah, Coronado. Coronado is here. And Point Loma. I have a close-up of it. Now this picture is a little bit blurry, and when we came back and looked at the film, or looked at the picture, I told Yuri, well, we're going 5 miles a second, so I had to kind of move the camera. I was zoomed in a lot, and I kind of had to move the camera like this as I was taking it, and Yuri said, no, you're just out of focus. So okay. But Yuri had one of those, he had one of those sharp eyes that, where many times, even though you set your focus at infinity, sometimes it's not quite at infinity. You have to come a little bit off of it, and so Yuri was very good at focusing, much better than I was. Southwestern part of South America, area called Patagonia. They have all these glaciers there, and NASA, we happen to be flying at a time when there wasn't much cloud cover, so they said keep taking pictures. And as many of you know, that how glaciers are receding is kind of one of the many indicators of global change or global warming. I just call this Glacier Art. It's just amazing, the different pictures you see. And this is the kind of thing you'd say, why would you be weaving baskets when you can look at this? But the different psychological benefits of each. Another picture. This happened to be an area in Central America where a year prior they had a volcanic eruption, and then even after a year the ash is flowing down and choking some of the rivers there, and it looked like they were having a small fire maybe there at the time too. This is Key West, Florida. One of the things that I decided once I was up there, I wanted to take a picture of every place I had been in the Navy. And this is Naval Air Station Key West, which is right there. Any Jimmy Buffett fans, any parrot heads in the crowd? Yeah, a few. I was lucky enough, Jimmy Buffett called me when I was up there in space. They told me the day before, and I got really nervous, and I'm thinking, wow, Jimmy Buffett's gonna talk to me and all this stuff. And so it was fun. And later on he goes, dude, I'm talking to an astronaut and you're nervous because you're gonna talk to me? Anyways, but beautiful area down there. Many of you probably have been down that way. U.S. Naval Academy is right there. Go Navy, beat Army. Here with Chesapeake Bay. And what would happen is that we had a laptop up there, kind of a navigation system, and I would just tell it, when will we be flying over the Naval Academy, at what time of day? Usually if you want to take a picture, it has to be during the day. So I just set that up, and I set a timer of when we'd be flying over. Here's Patuxent River, Maryland. That's where the Naval Air Test Center is, and Naval Test Pilot School is there. Oceana, NAS Oceana, Virginia Beach. Anybody guess what we're doing here, practicing? Yep, we're practicing CPR. Every week we had an emergency drill. It's kind of like being on a cruise ship where you have a drill, or periodically, and this happened to be a medical emergency drill. We brought out the defibrillator there. We're practicing two-person CPR. Yuri was taking the picture, so we simulated his chest height with towels and duct tape. I was pushing off the ceiling. Well, there really is no ceiling or floor other than the writing on the wall. But I just thought, I just want to make sure that somebody as short as I am, 5'4.5", a half is important, that I could reach, and actually grew about a half to an inch in space because your spine expands a little bit. I just make sure I could reach, and we have this bench because it's electrically isolated from the rest of the space station, because if you didn't do that and used a defibrillator to shock the patient, you'd shock everybody on space station. That would not be a good day. I'd been in space about, 3 months, and I went to Yuri and I said, Yuri, I really want to get a picture of Mount Everest, and Yuri had flown on Mir space station, the Russian space station before it, and Yuri goes, don't worry, it will come around again. And sure enough, I was up in the middle, I was supposed to be sleeping, happened to float by the computer, had to use a bathroom, saw that we were going to fly over the Himalayas soon, so I stayed up, and I knew if I looked at this kind of V-shaped valley, north is up to the top, and if I look down the east valley here, it would lead to Mount Everest there. Because you look at this picture, everything's high, Himalayas, everything's high there. And so there's a picture of Mount Everest. Anybody here read the book Into Thin Air? Great book. And I think recently there was a lot of news of, there was a picture of just showing just a line of people going to Mount Everest, and people are still losing their lives going to Mount Everest. But that's our human nature is to do things like that. Some of the other than basket weaving, other things that we could do to relax up there were reading books. So I'm reading Harry Potter. Yuri's is what they call Nasayashi Rybak, a real fisherman. He was reading an atlas of fishing in the Moscow region. And Carl there has Stephen Ambrose and Wild Blue. A lot of people look at the picture and they go, hey, wait a minute. Okay, if there's just 3 of you, who took the picture? We did have a timer on our cameras with the technology way back then. Yeah, we did. A cargo ship came up every 3 months or so. And I was really excited to get this tiny package from my family of cards and letters for my kids and everything. But when they opened the hatch to the cargo ship, all I could smell right away were the fresh oranges and apples. I won't get into detail what space station smells like with 3 guys on board after 3 months, but smelling something different was really good. We don't have a refrigerator up there. All of our food is freeze-dried or canned food. Some of it is meals ready to eat, like the NASA just puts their sticker on it that they get from the military. Also, half the food was Russian food, but just smelling something different like there. One of the things that when I came back down to Earth, you smell what it smells like after a fresh rainfall, kind of the ozone, kind of fresh smell, and just the things that we take for granted here on Earth, that when you're away from them for a long time, you appreciate much better. Here's Southern Lights. This is Aurora Australis. Again, this picture doesn't quite do it justice, but if you look on YouTube, there are some videos of fast forward of video of a space station going around, and I think they do include some auroras there as well. Here's a space shuttle Endeavour coming to pick us up. So even though Endeavour came up and it was a ship that took us up the space station, it went back, got refurbished, turned around within 6 months, and then came back up to visit us, and that was basically all if you can think of, that was their trunk, basically, that they carried all their food, water, and clothing that they needed for their trip. Does anybody want to guess who has the most cumulative number of days in space for an American astronaut? Is it a guy or a girl? Male or female? It's a female, and it's Peggy Whitson. So a lot of people think of Scott Kelly, because he was in space for almost a year, or about a year, but Peggy Whitson has more cumulative time because she spent more total time in space. So she holds the record. She has about a total of 667 days or something like that in space. A year and 3/4 something, or almost 2 years. I thought she was really brave flying with 2 Russian males. Yuri's hair is really long there. Now, while we were up there, Yuri cut our hair, but he never cut his hair. And I asked him, well, why do you not want to cut your hair? And I think it's kind of for the Russians. It's kind of like, hockey players with a beard that they grow. It's kind of a thing that they do. So he says, I've been in the Russian Air Force for so long. This is the only time I get to grow my hair legally. We just called them Fabio at the end of the mission. This is what space station looked like. And this is kind of what the naked eye, if you were to look out, so this is looking out a window of the space shuttle. This is kind of what it looks like with the naked eye. So for all you flat earthers out there, it is round. It's not just a trick lens that we use. Very thin atmosphere. You see the very thin blue line there. The solar rays that you see there. There's a close-up of it. This is the docking port. Where the space shuttle would dock to it, and they have other docking ports, but future vehicles will be docking to a port similar to that. We do have there's the robot arm, again made by Canada there. This is what space station looks like today, pretty much, except for the shuttle attached to it. It's longer than a football field in length, largest thing that's ever been assembled in space. Again, this is kind of what it looks like with the naked eye. They said this was my ride home when I got on the shuttle. They said this is where your place was, but actually felt kind of cozy, to kind of curl up in there. And here we are landed in California, and my family was waiting for me in Florida. So yeah, the weather wasn't good enough to land in Florida. We tried 2 or 3 times, not trying meaning that we intended to, but they told us the weather wasn't good enough, so we don't come home. And eventually we were starting to run out of food, so we had to come home. Real quick, some pictures of future vehicles. So here's a SpaceX Dragon. I think that's supposed to fly later this year. They did have a problem with it, a problem. I think one of their spacecraft exploded in Florida, unfortunately, so I don't know what the latest is of when they're scheduled, when they're supposed to fly a crew. This is the Boeing Starliner that they're building as well. I don't know why I don't have the NASA Orion rocket up there, but anyway, so eventually in the near future, spacecraft like this will be flying. That's all I have for today. For folks who want to stick around, ask any other questions, I'll be here. I also brought some photos with me for those who want to. I don't want to presume that anybody wants a signed photo, but they're up here if you want them. Any other questions before? Yes?
Yeah, I too, since you brought up gravity, I'm kind of interested. If you were in a sort of impending catastrophic situation, how quickly could you evacuate the space station, get into the capsule, and then, I assume you kind of go through training on how to get out of there.
Right, yeah, the biggest problems are, the 3 biggest problems, let's say, would be if you lost attitude control. And the problem with that is that you start losing power because the solar rays can't point correctly. And then you have to get away, because if it starts tumbling too quickly, then it may be beyond the point where you could undock safely. The other problem would be loss of pressure, pressurization, and now there are some things you can shut hatches to seal off a leak, and the other would be like a fire if you had on board. That was one of the emergencies that we practiced, and pretty much we would spend probably about 30 minutes troubleshooting to see what the problem is or to isolate the problem, but we could probably undock within an hour or so. We would probably be in the spacecraft in probably less than let's say less than 35 minutes. But yeah, yes?
Let people know they can still see Space Station.
Oh yeah. So if you want, there is a possibility. Some of you may have already done it, but if you go on spaceflight.nasa.gov, (gov), there are sightings available for space station because it's very, very bright up there. Now it has to be a few hours before sunrise or a few hours after sunset, and there's certain times that you can see it. I don't happen to know those times right offhand, but there should be some times coming up in the next week. If it happens to be clear weather and you can look outside and you'll see what looks like that something that's traveling about the speed of an airplane, but it's not blinking. It just looks like a star. Many of you have probably seen a satellite object, other objects in space like that. All right, thank you very much. Thank you.